All right, we continue then with our conversations on Marikana. Of course, you would know that yesterday was the 7th year anniversary of that fateful day. And former Northwest Deputy Police Commissioner, Major-General William Mpembe, Gideon van Zyl, Dingaan, Madoda and Oupa Pule are currently on trial for charges relating to the deaths of mine workers in Marikana. The four are facing charges of contravening the Commission Act, contravening IPID Act and defeating the ends of justice. On Monday, the Marikana support campaign, Right2Know, and Socio-Economic Rights Institute marched to the Mankwe Magistrate's Court ahead of the trial to demand justice for the families of the miners. For more on that, we're joined via Skype by Right2Know spokesperson Thami Nkosi. Thank you very much for joining us on Skype this afternoon. Pleasure to have you with us.
Good afternoon, Flo, and good afternoon to the viewers at home. And yeah, it's a pleasure to always continue to contribute to this important conversation.
You know, you marched on Monday together with the Marikana support campaign as well as the Socio-Economic Rights Institute. Talk to us about the aim of that march, and do you believe that you got your point across? I mean, it's 7 years later. What are you asking for? What are you demanding? And are you getting your point across as we've gone through 7 years now?
I think there's about three basic things that we're actually keen on putting onto the public discourse on the day. I think one of the important things is to simply say we've seen just how over the years, the trial of Mr. Mpembe and his co-accused has actually been dragging on for so long, simply because, there's an attempt by the NPA to not necessarily speed up the prosecution as well. And we've also been disappointed with the fact that IPID had indicted at least about 79 police officers. And that for us remains, problematic to say only 6 people then therefore would be taken to trial. So the first thing would be, there hasn't been enough conversation about the police role and the police responsibility and putting the shine on the case that is actually happening in the Mankwe Magistrate Court. So for us, it's an important thing to put into the public discourse to say there is this process that is happening and it's pretty slow, so which means it delays justice even further. That was the first point. The second point for us was that the Falam Commission had recommended, had established a expert panel on policing to look at, public order policing and tactical response unit and how they conducted themselves on that fateful day. And that report has not seen the light of day. It sits with the Minister of Police, Minister Pule, and it was submitted to him already in 2018, sometime in April. And what we're calling for is the release of the report so that the report can shed some light with regards to what were some of the internal procedures and protocols that the police broke with regards to how they conducted themselves. And also it would contain some recommendations with regards to saying, how do we then reform the police force with regards to how it responds to issues of labor disputes, to issues of protest. Yeah. So it would speak about how to reform the public order policing and the tactical response unit. So we think it's an important report. So that's another issue that we're putting on the discourse, to say we demand the release of this report because it would shed some light and assist even the prosecution of the police that are currently standing trial, but also to say, can the public know about the fact that there's this trial that is happening, and there must be media appetite and a public appetite to actually ensure that we put pressure on the justice system to ensure that this thing finally reaches its finality.
You've made quite a serious allegation there. You've said that over the years, this trial of the accused that I've mentioned has been dragging on, and you've said this is because you believe that the NPA is not really keen to see this case sort of completed. Why would you say that, and why do you think, if indeed the NPA does not want to see this case sort of closed, why would the NPA not want that?
I think part of the discussion, because we work with the comrades who were survivors of the massacre themselves, and part of the problems is the NPA is not necessarily taking into cognizance some of the evidence that they're providing. So by disregarding evidence that could be helpful with regards to the prosecution, that tells us something is not being done properly. That's the first point. The second point is that William Mpembe now has suddenly become the head of security of the mine now. And what are the trade-offs with suddenly him being rewarded for having kept the workers off Capital's throat? And for us, there's an implication that simply says there could be collusion even between the investigating officers and the NPA. So in the chain of law enforcement, in the chain of prosecution, for us, there are gaps that are clearly being ignored, and not taking cognizance into account, for example, the evidence, as I'm saying. And secondly, the collusion between the mining company as well as the police, who may be investigating Mpembe even further, because we know the youth of Marikana have always been interdicted from taking even a protest or staging a protest at the mine. So we have what we call slap suits. So the mine would interdict the community from exercising the right to protest. So there is some clear collusion and influence that Mpembe still has within the police force, and is using his position as the leader of security in the mine to actually infiltrate the police force and delay the process. Okay,
Mr. Nkosi, then I'm going to continue on where you're going with this, and I think maybe we should call a spade here. From what I'm understanding, you've basically said that the four that are currently on trial are sort of the scapegoats, I suppose, and that more people should then be held accountable. I'm going to ask you a straight question at this point then. Who are those people you believe should in fact also be on trial?
It's a myriad of people. One, I think there's been, to this point, absolutely no one from the mining executive perspective has actually stood trial, or has actually been, put to a process where they can actually tell the truth with regards to what were some of the collusions that they had between them and the politicians and the police to some degree. So the first one would be the mining executive that got off scot-free after they had used the police to kind of defend their own position. That's the first. Yeah. The second one is, we know there were leaks of Ramaphosa's email with Ria Pierga, and words like concomitant actions should be taken to put a stop to this thing. Very harsh language. So there's a clear connection between some senior police leaders, the mining executive, and political principals. And for us, we don't want to go for the low-hanging fruit, which is Mpembe and his co-accused, but also in the chain of command. Who else was involved in that? And we don't think the mining executive are innocent in this regard. We don't think people in the higher echelons, whether as a national commissioner, whether as a police minister at the time, would not have known anything about this. And we don't believe that, politicians, like I'm saying, the political principle immediately would be the Ministry of Police, but other sectors as well who are there. The Minister perhaps the Minister of Labor and stuff. How did you not get involved in the labor dispute between the miners and the mining company? So for us, there's a whole chain of accountability that's actually been effectively, avoided and not necessarily been followed through. So we would like to see finally some high-ranking political officials, some high-ranking, capital officials being held accountable to what transpired in Marikana.
Mr. Nkosi, you've said some very heavy names there. Do you believe, and you've mentioned to me earlier that, you're demanding the release of the report from the Farlam Commission recommendations. Do you believe that those names that you've mentioned will somehow be implicated should that report then be released? Are you of the belief that there's a reason why these recommendations, or this report rather, has not been released into public domain? What are your views on that?
I think at the moment it would be speculation with regards to what the contents are, and that's the reason why we're calling for the release of the report. But I think there's nothing that's stopping us from making our own assumptions with regards to why would somebody not want to then therefore release the report. I think that there's a deliberate attempt to seal and conceal certain sections of the report, primarily because it may be fingering certain comrades, it may be fingering certain friends of political, hierarchy, or it may be fingering certain police, hierarchy officials that are there. So as a result, the police would not necessarily want to put this into the public because it may be a public indictment on how they conducted themselves and how they followed procedure and protocol internally. So it may essentially kind of scrutinize what exactly transpired with regards to the chain of command and how the messaging went through and filtered through and where these things came from. So I think it seems to us that ultimately here's a report that says here's where you went wrong, and here's a ministry that simply says are we willing or are we prepared to put this into the public and subject ourselves to public scrutiny or the court of public opinion or whatever the case might be? And I don't think they want to take that risk. Perhaps now it's almost like trying to kind of find a political solution to it, then ultimately release the report with some political consensus with regards to what to redact and how far to go with revealing what the contents of the reports are.
All right, I wish we had more time, Mr. Nkosi. Thami Nkosi of Right2Know, thank you so much for giving us your time there, speaking to us, of course, about those that are under trial at this time. Major-General William Mpembe, Gideon van Zyl, Dingaan, Madoda and Oupa, Pule, who are currently then on a trial, charges relating to the death of mine workers in Marikana. But of course, as you can hear, Right2Know wanting more people to be held accountable.